enough. They all had colours, mine black and white, because it's what I'm like. I don't know. It's like this, I'm right, you're wrong. That's how it goes. So yeah, how do you follow Alexis in speech? The trouble with Patricia is she's just not enthusiastic enough about her subject. I want you all to remember that you laughed when I said that, because that's relevant in a minute. Okay. My talk is called Truth, Fact and Stories, because I'm interested in that. Not for any other reason. So truth, what is it for? Well, it is the aim of scientific inquiry. It's for understanding. And it's for insight. I think those are the three ways that I look at it. And why do I think it's important? Why would I bother telling you? Well, when you graduate from UCU, we hope, well, we do, don't we? Girls, we do. We hope that you have learned rigorous thinking. We hope you've learned logical thinking. We hope you've learned the value of evidence and how to build, support, or attack theories that are based on factual evidence. That's kind of pretty much how you get taught, right? You can't just talk crap. Because that's pretty much what everybody thinks you're doing if you're not doing this stuff. All right. And see, it's all very well, but if you're a university student, you are actually maybe one of the, in Ireland, you'll be one of the top 5% if you make it past bachelor's into something like a master's or PhD. Don't know where you are in the Netherlands, maybe 10%, maybe not even. But see, the rest of the world isn't like that. People don't go around all day doing rational thinking. It's not what they do. You know what they do? They chat. You may laugh. I'm serious. You need to know how to do that. And you need to know that it's valuable, that it's actually very important. It requires insight. It actually requires insight to be able to manage real life and real life situations. And actually, to do that all across the world, regardless of whether you're a nice factual Dutch society or like Ireland full of leprechauns going around telling stories all the time, spot the cultural stereotype. You need stories. That's what we do. So this evening's approaches, anyone who took a course in philosophy has come across this. Well, they've come across the first two, and they have learned to set fires and burn people who talk about the last one. Correspondence theory of truth. Oops, back we go. Correspondence theory of truth. That's the notion that there's a kind of one-to-one mapping between your statement and some worldly fact. It accepts, it actually requires that there's a world external to the mind. So maybe an example of a correspondence type of truth would be the boy is sitting at the table. Isn't he cute? He's not mine. Coherence theory of truth then would be more like what you say has to be coherent within some specified set of sentences, propositions, or beliefs. There's not a single set of universes, more an assortment of commonly held or discussed perspectives. So it has to be out there in the common field. These are the kind of people who write about it and who would be proponents of it, more so than correspondence. So maybe if you look at the same picture and you think, well, what would be a kind of coherent truth? Be like, the boy is bored. How do we get there? Well, we get there because, all the signs are there. And I'm assuming that you know what boys look like when they're bored. I know what boys look like when they're bored. I've got one. And that's kind of what they look like, right? They're clean, I don't want to learn my Latin. We don't say anything more than that he's bored, but we assume that that's okay. Nobody's going to counter-say it. Personally held truths, which everybody scoffs at and says that's terrible, you can't talk about that, seriously? Seriously? University students? Seriously? Scientific? Personally held truth? What is that? Well, actually how we arrive at insight, and insight is terribly important in understanding ourselves and the world around us. They allow for personal involvement. They entertain understanding of obscure aspects of emotions, things we can't really talk about because we can't quantify them, and the context in which they arise. So maybe an insight on this, and the yellow stuff is the important stuff, is a poor lad. He'd rather be doing something else, because that's how I feel when I look like this. That's how we arrive at kind of insights, as we reflect on what we're seeing. What we're seeing is whether it's a correspondence truth or a coherent truth. We reflect on that, and we have to arrive at some kind of insight that actually helps us understand it and make it a truth we can possess. I took this little table from an article by Keith Oakley on why fiction may be twice as true as fact. And he writes a lot about this. It's interesting, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, he's sort of on the edge of psychology and neuroscience. And there are a lot of interesting articles now about how people can't really interpret the world particularly well by relying on things like correspondence and coherence. Coherence is bad, it's easier for people than correspondence, but actually those personal truths that we arrive at through reflection are the ones that help us not being us kind of smart people in the room, but being regular Joe, people who have my dog, that kind of thing. So what is the value of a single explicit fact? Here's a sentence: there's no Dutch city with 1 million inhabitants. What do you reckon I'm going to say about that? If that was like a slide heading, what would that be about? I'm going to start naming names if nobody volunteers an answer. Mirta?
I knew it. Repeat the question. It's not that bored.
What is she like? She didn't even read. Who let her in? If I start my talk with "there is no Dutch city with 1 million inhabitants," what am I likely to be saying? Where am I likely to go with that?
The Netherlands isn't a very populous country?
No. Help her.
Phrase.
What?
It's a better phrase. It could have been better phrase.
It could have been, but I deliberately didn't. You'll see why when you see the next sentence. Jorn?
It's about how we don't have big city problems?
All right. Yes. So, and I think for most people who are talking about the Netherlands and they talk about the size of cities, they're generally talking about, oh look, the Netherlands are urban planning, aren't they great, no big city problems. The next sentence is semantically, in terms of truth values, exactly the same, but we change the country we're talking about. We say there's no English city with 1 million inhabitants. What does that mean? What am I talking about now? Not the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I just mean that, looking at English cities and the numbers, if you go to Google, there's not one that says 1.000000. But see, like, what has changed? I just changed the nationality. There's no real reason why coming out of that. It's all context. And so when I start a slide with "there's no Dutch city with 1 million inhabitants," and I'm expecting people to understand what I'm talking about, it's because we have these shared set of assumptions and contexts that we can understand. And of course we have common sense. There's the kind of common sense that says, well, if she says it, she must mean something about where would she be going with that, There's a whole load of common sense stuff that we know that we don't even think about it. Sooty is my dog, by the way. Like, for example, if I put Sooty in the kitchen, she's no longer in the garden. When Patricia comes into the room, her head comes with her. If I'm at home and I came in through some opening unless I was born there and never left the building. If Alexis is alive at 9 this morning and is still alive at the end of this presentation, she was also alive at lunch. Buffalo do not wear trousers. Opening a new box of muesli will not actually vaporize the house. And Sooty is smaller than Amsterdam. All of these things are true. We know these things are true. None of you has an issue with this, right? No one's going to question it. Why is it funny? It's funny because it's actually, those kind of facts, what can they possibly mean? Without some sort of a context and a story, they don't mean anything. They're kind of funny because they're anomalous. Whether explicit or non-explicit, all facts need some kind of context for coherence. That is why I can say the trouble with Patricia is that she's not enthusiastic about anything. You look at that and you go, that is simply not true. Why would she say that? It must be, oh, maybe she's trying to be funny, let's laugh and be polite, and we all did. So you get it. You get that actually the content of what you're saying isn't terribly relevant. What's really relevant is what you meant. And what you mean is usually what you want to elicit from your hearer or hearers. The context we give a set of facts can be more important than the facts themselves in conveying a message. And stories are actually more effective than a list of facts in conveying any truth. If you give somebody a list of facts, they look at them, if they're really very factual, they're actually quite dry. Who here has struggled, even in the early hours of the evening, trying to read a scientific paper? Falling asleep going, I can't believe it, I'm not that tired, why am I asleep? Yeah, see? Hands up. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Me too. Look, both my hands up, not kidding. And that's because they're generally not stories. You know, I mean, if you were to hand out a paper for one of your courses, and you say, wait till I tell you, there's this mad electron microscope, it's fantastic. Can you imagine? You're still not getting an A for that paper. She just stood up and did that. We find it overly impressive. Like, what is this about? Stories are much more effective than a list of facts. And this has to do with semantics and pragmatics, coming from linguistics, which is my field. In semantics, dealing about meaning, relationship between signifiers and the thing which is signified. That's what we would like it to be. It's pretty straightforward. Pragmatics then is what we actually mean when we say something, which is extremely fuzzy and hazy, but it is really very important because it's communication. It's what we do. We can't talk unless we're trying to tell a story, essentially. You cannot understand me if you can't figure out what it is I actually mean when I say whatever I say. Anyway, so what is the semantics of this? There's a bag, there's a cat. Cat is not in the bag. It was in the bag, now it's out of the bag. That's what that says. Which is kind of okay. That would more or less match the pragmatic utterance if, you know, you're in a room and it's like, oh my god, where's the cat? The bag's empty. Right? Then, okay, the cat is out of the bag. But actually, generally in pragmatics, when you see the cat is out of the bag, you think, oh dear, the story is out now. Now they know the dirty secret. That's sort of what it is. We know this. Why do we know this? We've learned it. But you know, often if you say this to, for example, a non-native speaker or somebody who doesn't come from an English native language area where they don't have this particular expression, if you say the cat is out of the bag, somebody will look at you. Sorry? Excuse me? It's like when you have the dean telling you there's all kinds of bears on the road. It's not even like every Dutch person gets that. Only half the Dutch people get that, because the other half are going, that's not an expression in Dutch, and it is so. But let's have a look at some facts then. So here are some facts. There's this guy Frank, he's married. Frank got married to experience the loss of personal freedom. He punishes his wife because he sees her as the cause for this loss. The punishment is violent. I'm not sure whether it's physical or psychological, it's violent. And the situation is Frank's choice. What are you making of that?
Frank's an asshole?
Well, see, this is really interesting. We're getting there. This is actually part of the facts that you can assume are behind. Frank hung his wild ears on a nail that he drove through his wife's forehead. You're laughing. See, and the thing is, I didn't write Frank as an asshole because it doesn't actually say it in there and you can't conclude it. But the thing is, when you write this, and when you read it, not only do you think he's an asshole, you think, oh my god, I really don't like him, and you know what? He probably smells bad too. But really, like, he hung his wild ears on a nail and he drove. I bet the nail was rusty. Are you with the rusty nail? Yeah. It's one sentence, and we have just a ton of context and stuff that we just know is behind this. It's much better than a set of facts, isn't it? If the nail was rusty, I don't know, I wasn't there. But if the nail was rusty, if he is a not very nice person, if he doesn't wash and has bad personal hygiene, if he's got bad breath, I'm sure he has bad breath, I'm certain he has bad breath. I reckon he's missing a bit of teeth as well. I reckon you can probably grow potato between the gap there. But if all of that is true, you need a whole list of facts. And by the time you've read them all down, you've got to go back up to the top to make sure you've got everything. And that's a relatively interesting story. But, you know, just the one sentence gives you the whole thing. That's why Tom makes his fan. Speaker and listener goals. When speakers are speaking, in fact, probably they would like to give you a list of facts. They'd like to say, first this, then this, then this, then this. But they know they can't because you won't get it. Listeners are not interested in the obvious. Listeners are interested in the story around the obvious. That's what makes something like Frank's Wild Years, even though it's not that 5 minutes nonsense. Even though, now you've made me look what you've done. I told you she's a bully. I never liked her. I love standing up here, you can say that kind of stuff and they can't stop you, it's great. So you know, the listeners are actually not interested in the specific facts about Frank. What they really want is, like, you know, that he hung his wild ears on a nail that he drove through his wife's forehead because he gives him the dirt. Without kind of saying it, you know. Stories make information much easier to process. Why is this? I like to think that it's part of relevance theory, which is something that's put forward by Sperber and Wilson. And that is that whenever somebody speaks, we search desperately for the relevance in what they're saying. That's what we really want, is for what they're saying to be relevant. Speakers provide evidence of their intention to convey a certain meaning. So if I say the trouble with Patricia, you know it's not serious, right? And there's going to be something in the way I'm saying it that gives you evidence that I couldn't actually be serious about this. And the meaning you infer is inferred by all of you on the basis of the evidence you see in me, and that's what we're doing all the time. So there is evidence being exchanged, but it's different from factual evidence. We automatically process each new item of information in a context in which maximum contextual effect is obtained from minimum processing cost. Actually, that's where a lot of confusion and miscommunication comes from, is we don't go that extra step to figure out what it was that somebody actually would have meant. We take things perhaps sometimes at face value because we didn't push for the context, because we could understand it at face value and it had a meaning we could accept. I like very much the approach that psychology has to how we manage all of this, and that is the theory of mind approach. It's about making sense of the social world. It's the attribution of mental states to self and others, and acknowledging that my rich mental life is not the same as yours. It's not available to you, but we must have something in common. It's about beliefs, intents, desires, pretending, knowledge, deception. And actually we see that with people who don't function properly socially, there's a deficit in their theory of mind. It's not very whole. When they produce stories and try and get people to maybe look at pictures of people doing things, look at little snippets of stories in cartoon form, or even just look at non-human geometrical shapes sort of dancing towards each other, two little triangles going dance, 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 and then they go towards each other, and then they go away and dance away, and oh, look, they kissed. And, you know, trying to, because what happens, that's what they're looking for. They're trying to find out what, how you can assume feelings, how you can empathize, how you can try and theorize about what's going on in somebody else's head. The core mentalizing network is very large for this. So what they do is they, for example, run fMRI scans on people while they're doing these tasks. And just a quick picture of, you know, some of those things. The areas across the brain that are excited they're diverse and they're all across the brain. The whole brain seems to be busy with this. And interestingly, there's a shared network existing for theory of mind and narrative comprehension. When they tell people stories, the same kind of areas light up. So truth via stories, it seems that when we do tell stories about things, our listeners are actually trying to figure out what could we possibly mean. Who are we? What are we like? What sets of beliefs underlie the things that we're saying? Are we telling the truth? Are we not telling the truth? Trying to put themselves in our shoes. And so I think it's actually really important to acknowledge the importance of stories. I won't bother showing a whole lot of slides now, but I know I've spoken to a good number of you about the Irish storytellers, the Shonachie, who were charged. It was actually their task in old Irish society of bringing down the truth. That was their task. And they were involved in solving legal disputes, marital disputes, land disputes. They were important for transferring genealogy, cultural heritage, and their task was to do it using stories. And this is how it was phrased, if they had to resort by bullying you with facts, they had failed. And they could lose their job, because then they couldn't convey to people an understanding of what was true. Which is why, you know, when you're down the pub, so many Irish people will begin a story with, I knew a man. and you know, it's mostly not true. I mean, I'm forever saying to my students, I knew a student. There has to be some truth in it. I did know a student. But what I say next is often, this is my message to you and I want you to get this. And the way I tell that story is about making sure that you understand it the way I meant it, And if I gave it to you as a list of facts, you might end up in level 3 basket weaving, but that's not what I wanted. I guess I have to stop, but this is more or less what I wanted to say, is that when we leave academia and we go out into the real world, we are confronted with a different kind of truth, and that truth is terribly important, not because it's earth-shattering or we'll get great publications out of it, but because frankly you can't buy a loaf of bread down a French bakery without it. That was it. I'm sure you're having a question. Money I want.
This is a really important one. Probably 95% of academics either believe or have been told that when you make science, you have to test your theories in real life with observable facts. But if it is your premise that you don't really see that, if you don't have any kind of storytelling or narrative building in academic articles, then how can you produce science?
How can you do science? Well, first thing you write better papers. But really the best papers are the ones that have words like interestingly and against all our expectations, and things that will actually draw in the reader to find this interesting. Like a little pointer going, read this bit, this is cool. But I see people do go around observing the world, they do, and they do draw theories, but not necessarily on facts. And when people want to understand something, they need it told to them as a story. I'm sure you've all had the experience of a lecturer who's really clearly very brilliant in his field or her field, but actually when they have to explain what they're doing, it's very hard because they tell you a whole load of facts. But you really need someone to tell you the story. You know, you really need somebody to put it in a context and to allow you an interpretation, and also to allow you not to be at the level that they are at, whether it's a higher or a lower level. And that is about the real world. That is about being out there and functioning in the real world. Because actually, you know, we're not doing science every day. At least, you know, I'm not. Not what I do every day. You know, I feed the dog and I say hi to the guy in the woods and buy stuff in the shop and, you know, cycle and that kind of thing. And, you know, I don't kind of go, oh, I'm observing a red traffic light. Let me theorize. I go, shit, it's red! And the guy behind me goes, look at that woman, let me theorize. I mean, you know, so it's fine. It's fine to go out there and, you know, get some facts and build your theory. In fact, it's very important because otherwise you can't advance certain fields of knowledge. In fact, most fields of knowledge. But that's really not what we're busy with every day, I don't think.
But you do science, if not every day, then, you know, you've written a lot of papers. How do you find the balance between your storytelling and the academia that you have to sort of confirm to? You have to write an academic paper. Do you even fit stories in there? Or?
No, you can't fit stories in academic papers, no. You can't, but what you can do is you can try and make them interesting. The problem is, usually you're stuck with the word count. You start writing it really well. When it comes to, oh God, I've got to get half a page out, you take out all the things like interestingly, like they all go. You're just left with your kind of, first this, then this, then this, then this, look, conclusions done. Yeah, you have to try and fight against that, and often your reviewers will come back and say, can you make this a bit more interesting? Can you link section 1 to section 2? I think I can, but you need 17 paragraphs. You know? But yeah, it's tricky. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing, which confirms everything that you just said. Annalise Stradefeld, one of your UCAA alumni, came and gave a discussion, she gave a talk last Wednesday on psychology. She was very heavily influenced by Willem Wagenaar, who's a professor here. He was very well loved, taught a class on crime in the courtroom, and she is following in his footsteps. He made such a deep impression on her, and I said to her, what is it about him that made him such an amazing teacher? And she said he would sit at the desk and tell stories for 2 hours. And this man was very, very deeply loved. And I once asked him, what is it that makes you a great teacher? And he said, I have 15 with 30 lectures a semester. I give my students 2 bits of information each lecture, and if they walk out of here with 60 new pieces of information that they don't forget. I have been successful. And he did this through storytelling. So this just goes to show you that everything that some of us try to do, ramming cognitive neuroscience, things that our students wrote in my criminology class, the stories are the ones that the students remember.
Yeah. You actually see it in your exams, you know. Like somebody you explain something in syntax, and then they don't get it, and the whole class kind of glazes over. And then you kind of got to put it in a story, or make it funny, or give it some kind of other context. You get it right back in your exams, pretty much exactly the way you said it in class. It's not in the books, it's probably not even in your slides at that point. But people remember stories. It's a very effective way of getting a point across. Yeah. Am I done?
Well, you try to wrap your information into stories when you teach?
Yeah.
Is it hard?
No.
Do you have to actually try to come up with stories, or is it just...
Stories present themselves. Everybody can do it, everybody does it.
Usually about the dog. Usually about the dog.
I've
No,
never
actually,
actually
it's not about aliens or pirates, the way I remember it.
I think
I have a question about stories and truth, which I'm not sure how I would phrase, so I'll just start talking and hope it makes sense. Because if you have a story between two people, how come that they both remember the story, but at some point they remember it in a different way? So even though you just said that you get your stories from class back the way you said them in your exams, what also often happens is that you share an experience with somebody and they go, oh, the third person that was there was so-and-so, and you're like, no, it was so-and-so. How does that happen?
it happens a lot in families. It happens more in families than anywhere else, apparently. And you know, usually it's stuff like Christmas dinner. Wait till I tell you, did you hear what Eugenie said? She did. No, I swear she did. I swear she did. And then someone goes, actually, I was there. She didn't say that at all. She did this. No, definitely, I remember. I still remember. I can quote it. I can cite her. She never said that. She did. And what is that about? The idea behind that is that, in fact, while situations are happening, we're creating stories about them. We have to create stories about stuff that has happened, or we don't remember them. Certainly about events. And the way you'll experience an event will be different to the way I'll experience an event. Like if you just take a classroom event, I was the teacher, you were the student. I mean, really, we couldn't possibly have experienced that class the same way. I was really worried you were all laughing at me because I hadn't prepared properly. You didn't know. And you were all worried that I was going to tell you something really, really hard. I was going to ask you an exam, which I never do. So you know, already the context in which that class is given is totally different. So people tell me I did stuff in class and I go, you're kidding, I still never did. Yeah, you did. 28 of us, one of you did. Yeah.
Is there really a place for storytellers in science?
Is there a place for storytellers in science?
Yes.
The people who can write the best papers are the ones who write the most readable ones, and the most readable ones are the ones that have made the story a story. But you will never get a story published if you're not very clear about what is factually true and what you have evidence for. You cannot begin a scientific paper saying, I once knew a man.
There's a challenge.
Interestingly enough, science communication does that because they take these very, very complex scientific articles like Patricia Post's presentation that people like me have trouble understanding, and then they write these kinds of articles for Time Magazine or National Geographic in such a way that people like me go, oh, that is really interesting. So there is a way to take storytelling, but you're reaching a different audience, clearly.
Yeah, and in fact, the thing that makes a story the best is when you make it personal. And very good scientific writing takes the personal out. And it must take the personal out, because otherwise, as soon as you're trying to get somebody on your side, then you're trying to convince them with something other than your scientific evidence. Yeah.
Don't you think that the fact that there is little storytelling in scientific writing is that there's often a word count on the papers that you're writing? So what you're trying to do is put as many facts in there and like get all your research, the stuff that you've done, the amazing things that you found, trying to push that in there instead of taking a more simple thing and expanding it with clear text, so better storytelling.
Yeah, except for I think people really want to get bang for their buck on a scientific article. You want to get as much. You're going to have, because when you read a scientific article, you're going to say, oh, well, he did that. Well, did you do that as well? I'm sure you must have done that actually. Why didn't you write about that? So you pretty much got to include everything that could be relevant. And the sort of literary devices that you use for linkage and for highlighting and focus, if you can keep those in there, then that's going to be a better paper than if you take them out and make it very mechanical. But see, that kind of story truth stuff involves being personal. You can't be relying on somebody else's theory of mind without being personal. You have to. And publishing scientific papers is really about taking the personal out of it. But see, scientific papers isn't what you're doing when you're down in the bread shop or in the supermarket. And that's my point of it, is that people get carried away with this notion of truth and evidence and fact. But the world just does not function like that. Look at the politicians. We vote them in. Did you really believe everything they said? No. You kind of went for the kind of people they hope that they will be. And they hope that you will be, and they hope that the country will be. That's what you went for. But we don't kind of listen to every word they say and say, I vote them in on exactly that thing. You don't. In fact, when we describe them, we don't talk about, this is the party that said we're not going to include physiotherapy in the next health packet. We say this is a right-wing party, or this is a left-wing party, or this is a conservative party, or this is a radical party. That's what we say. So, we vote in whole governments and allow our lives to be run like that. So in the real world, we're not really looking at evidence at all.